Would you pray with me? God of great grace and mercy, we ask that as we hear your word today, that we may be led by it, that it may guide our lives, that it may guide our relationships, and that it may guide our will and purpose as we serve you. And gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you this day, now, and forever, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Okay, I'm glad you are all sitting down, because I have some news that might be shocking to many of you. Are you ready? You're not ready. Are you sure? You sure you're not ready? No. Because I don't want to just drop this on you. But here it goes. Friends, it's election season. You didn't gasp. I mean, I thought for sure that would be shocking news. A total revelation, because nobody's talking about it, right? We don't see any signs for it. I mean, we just wouldn't even know what's going on if I didn't just tell you, right? Well, okay. All joking and sarcasm aside, it is election season, right? And what does that mean for us? Well, it means we find ourselves in the heart of a season where we are supposed to be seriously assessing the characteristics and qualities and experiences of the candidates running for federal, state, and local offices. And in this election season, we are supposed to decide which of those candidates we believe have the best makeup of those characteristics and qualities and experience to be strong and effective leaders for our cities, our state, and our national government. Now, before any of you get up to leave, because you think this is going to be a message about this upcoming presidential election or the current culture of politics in our country today, let me put your mind at ease. It isn't. We hear about that far too much day in and day out, nearly everywhere else in our lives, and I feel there needs to be a place where we can get away from that bitterness and divisiveness and toxicity that this current presidential election has created. No, instead, over the next 4 weeks, we are going to look more closely at the characteristics and qualities of some of the remarkable people in the Bible who transformed from ordinary individuals into extraordinary leaders because of their willingness to listen to and be led by God. And the first person we are looking at today is Joseph. And just so there is no confusion, this is Jacob's son Joseph and not Jesus' father Joseph. We will be focusing on that Joseph in a couple months as we prepare for Christmas. No, the story of Jacob's son Joseph can be found in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, in chapters 37 through 47. And his story may be familiar to you, and you may have heard that or read that in the Bible or learned that in Sunday school or in Christian education. But I learned it when I was about 8 years old, and my children's choir performed a version of the Broadway musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat at our church. And if you have never seen that show, you should really check it out because it is a wonderfully entertaining telling of Joseph's story. Now, I played one of Joseph's brothers. And there were, I know, right? Boo. And there were 11 of them, so it was kind of easy for me to blend in and be part of the chorus, and that was just about perfect for me. But what I didn't understand at the time, however, was that I was playing one of Joseph's siblings who was so angry and jealous and disgusted with his brother's dreams and visions that he was willing to go along with a cruel and heartless plan to not only fake his brother's death, but then sell him into slavery, all the while making his father think that he had been killed by wild animals. You know, I never considered myself playing the role of villain, but essentially that is what I was doing. I mean, will you change it? Just look at me. Look how devious I look up there. Don't notice there's any resemblance to my son either, do you? Now, I think sometimes when we read Joseph's story, we sort of gloss over the fact that his brothers didn't just tease him, play tricks on him, and make his life miserable because they were upset with him and jealous about his relationship with their father. They actually came up with a plan to kill him. And Joseph's life was only spared because their greed overcame their hatred at the last minute, and they sold him into slavery instead. Now, Joseph could have given up at this point. Those dreams and visions he had of being a great leader where others were bowing down to him and following his command could have vanished. He could have seen his brother's actions as being a sign from God that this was to be his fate or station in life. But instead, he tried to make the best of a bad situation. Joseph attempted to turn a problem into an opportunity. In fact, through hard work, loyal service, and his faith in God, Joseph became the head servant in the house of Potiphar, an Egyptian officer in Pharaoh's court. And everything was going well for Joseph in Potiphar's home until he spurned the sexual advances of Potiphar's wife and ended up being falsely accused of assaulting her, which then led him to be unceremoniously thrown in prison. So he goes from being favored son to betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, works his way up out of the literal pits to attain something new and wonderful in his life, only to have that taken away from him through an unjust act. Now, I think for most of us, that would be a backbreaker, wouldn't it? I mean, we had just done all that work to come back from the brink, only to have it all come crashing down once again. How many of us would have the strength to endure the hardship and injustice that Joseph experienced? I know I would have struggled to keep from falling into despair. Those are some pretty hard things to have to deal with. Yet somehow, through it all, Joseph held firm to his belief that God was there with him, to guide him through the difficult days and keep him open to the possibility of a better tomorrow. And Joseph's faith and trust in God was rewarded when he was given the opportunity to put his gift of interpreting dreams to use in service of fellow prisoners and eventually the Pharaoh. And his analysis of Pharaoh's disturbing dream about abundance and famine in the land was so spot on that it earned him not only his freedom from prison, but a position of prestige and prominence at the right hand of the Pharaoh himself. His wisdom and sound advice was to store up food during the abundant harvest so that there would be enough food for everyone when the lean years hit. And trust me, when they hit hard. Think about your own lean years in your life. When they hit, they certainly hit hard. And for 7 years, drought and famine were constant in the land of Egypt and the surrounding areas like Canaan, where Joseph's brother and father still lived. And at one point during those lean years, food became so scarce in Canaan that Joseph's brothers had to travel to Egypt because it was the one place that had storehouses full of it, thanks to Joseph. But that trip, however, brought with it an opportunity that tested Joseph both personally and professionally. Now, just imagine for a moment that someone who has hurt and wronged you is standing right before you. And not only do you have a chance to confront them, but because of your position, you literally hold their life in your hands. That is the exact situation that Joseph found himself in when his brothers came to Pharaoh's court to beg for food. We don't always realize how dire the situation must have been for them to travel days to get to Egypt in order of hoping to just bring back some food to get them through. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, I think most of us, when confronted with this type of decision, would seriously consider vengeance as a proper course of action against those who have wronged us. After all, it would only be just for them to reap what they have sown, right? And Joseph is certainly tempted to exact that vengeance against his brothers. He even schemes to have his youngest brother framed for stealing from Pharaoh so that he, and by association all of his siblings, would be subject to trial and punishment. But when it finally comes time to take his revenge, Joseph does what many of us, I think, often fail to do today. He opens himself to God's leading and allows compassion to drive his decisions rather than vengeance. And through the lens of compassion, Joseph no longer saw the men standing before him as enemies, but as his brothers once again. Instead of subjecting them to the unjust accusations and judgment that he endured, Joseph instead offers compassion and forgiveness to his brothers. And by doing that, Joseph opened the door to reconciliation with his family, which was a decision that had momentous consequences not only for Joseph, but ultimately for the entire nation of Israel. For without that act of reconciliation, Jacob and his family would never have come to Egypt, and the Hebrew people may never have come into relationship with the God of all creation in the same way, and became God's chosen people. Sadly, compassion is often viewed as a weakness rather than a strength in our world today. And compassionate leaders are often labeled and written off as being soft, ineffective, and easily manipulated. Yet, how much better would our world be if our leaders opened themselves to God's leading and allowed their decisions to be guided by compassion? How might that impact our ability to hear and respond to opposing viewpoints? How might compassionate conversations move us to work together to achieve a greater good? Like making quality health care truly affordable to all, or finding energy alternatives that are both economically sound and environmentally friendly. It is no secret that our country is experiencing a political and social polarization and division that is almost unrivaled since the Civil War. Compassionate leaders, however, can go a long way in helping to mend those divisions by allowing God's Spirit to work in new and profound ways. Joseph's compassion for his brothers transformed their relationship from one of betrayal, brokenness, and division to one of reconciliation and future possibility. We need more of those transformations happening in our world today. Now, I don't often ask for a response, but can I get an amen for that? We need more of those transformations happening in our world today. Now, I said I was not going to speak much about the upcoming presidential election, and I'm going to remain true to my word. I'm not. But what I want to remind us all of, however, is that we are not only going to vote for a president coming up in just about 8 days on November 8th. We are voting to elect leaders at every level of government, from city, state, to federal. And as citizens of this country, we are called to learn about the characteristics, qualities, and experiences of those candidates running for elected office. But friends, you've heard it before and you'll hear it again, that is not enough. What we need to do is go out and vote. We need to go out and vote for those candidates we believe represent and live out the best of those qualities and characteristics. And over the next week, we have the opportunity to take some time to learn about the candidates running for office in our district. And we have a chance to decide for ourselves which ones truly embody the strong, effective, and yes, compassionate leadership that Joseph modeled and God inspired. Let's challenge ourselves as well to act compassionately towards others so that we can open up possibility for God to work in our lives and the world in new and transformative ways, to reconcile and heal the divisions among us that seem to be growing larger every day. For when we live as Christ lived, forgiving and loving others rather than convicting and judging them, we show compassion in a way that brings peace and unity rather than violence and division. May it be so this election season. Thanks be to God. Amen.